Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Binge Battle. I'm your host, Mark Ellis, and I'm just so pumped for this week's episode because, well, we made it, and now there's another sensation that you can catch on Netflix that has already lodged itself firmly in the cultural zeitgeist around the world. That would, of course, be Squid Game. I finally got a chance to check it out. I binged it in 2 nights, and I went back and forth in my own head as to whether I'd be great at this or I'd be terrible at it. I think I'd probably in reality be out by the second game, the honeycomb game, if you will. But that's what we're here to talk about today, celebrating all things Squid Game and getting deep into what your favorite game is, who's your favorite character, what was the most shocking death, and do we agree with LeBron James about the ending of season one, or at least what I hope is going to be just season one. We have two incredible panelists here who are going to be chiming in and giving their thoughts in today's binge battle. Introducing first, she is a film and TV critic at the Hollywood Reporter. You've seen her work in everything from slash film to Mashable. One of our favorites here in the Rotten Tomatoes family. Angie Han is here. You can follow her at AJ Han. And Squid Game first get on your radar? Were you just like everybody else and it drops on Netflix and it's, what is this? I need to watch every second.
Yes. So it came basically out of nowhere, which, as someone who covers TV, kind of made me mad because you try it, like you try to plan out your schedule ahead of time. Like you look at the upcoming release calendar, you're like, oh, this is going to be big. I think this is going to be talked about. But like Squid Game, at least for me, just came out of nowhere. I didn't know what it was until it was on Netflix and it was the only thing anyone could talk about. And then I still actually, I'm gonna admit, I took like a week to not watch it. I was just doing other stuff, and then like everyone's like, "Oh, it's very dark and heavy," and I was like, I don't know if I'm in the mood." But then the buzz was so deafening, I finally had to check it out. And then, of course, as soon as you watch the first one, you're just like, "Well, okay, I'm in it for the long haul now." So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the same way as you, where it doesn't matter if it's something like Stranger Things or Tiger King or whatever drops. I'm going to give everybody else a week, and then I'm going to check Twitter and see what they're, if they're still raving about it, then I'll suck it up and I'll go investigate. And like you, from that first episode, I was just hooked and I needed to know what was going to happen next. And what happens next now is we introduce your competitor today, although we're all going to leave here better friends than we entered, and that is Jon Lee Brody from Gegghead Games. He is all over the interwebs and sometimes in person playing games that range from nothing where there's going to be a penalty quite like you see in Squid Game, John, but it does get pretty heated over there at Gegghead.
It can, it's slightly friendlier than they got at Squid Game, but yeah, it can get very intense for sure.
I asked Angie this too. Were you aware of Squid Game when it dropped? Had you heard anything about it, or were you just as surprised as the rest of us?
I mean, and at the end of the day, I was surprised, not surprised because I'm always trying to be savvy to what's going on with Korean cinema and TV. The director and writer, Hong Dok-hyuk, he did this really cool movie called Silence with Gong-woo from Train to Busan. So like, I'm always trying to like figure out like who's doing what over there. I don't have a direct line or anything, but I just kind of ask around. But I never heard specifically about Squid Game. I just kind of heard something's going on over there. But it took me, I got thrown into it just like everybody else. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, I'm all in. This is kind of crazy. But at the same time, if you watch enough Korean movies and TV, that's kind of par for the course. There's always some sort of crazy twist going on, and I'm here for all of it.
Yeah, and it is funny doing the backstory and looking into research for Squid Game to do this program. Like the creator, I mean, this goes back to 2008, where he himself was sort of feeling down and out, was in debt, and was a little bit like our lead character that we're following in Squid Game, and so inspired by shows like Battle Royale and Rotten Tomatoes. If y'all want to go do your research yourself, you can see a bunch of shows that Rotten Tomatoes has recommended that sort of feel a little like Squid Game, whether it's Alice in Borderlands or it's even the Hunger Games films or Battle Royale. So whole lot of stuff for y'all to check out. But today it is all about Squid Game. And Jon Lee Brody and Angie Han are my esteemed guests here. And we're going to get into this over 4 rounds of competition. Here's how it breaks down. I'm going to ask a question to kick off the round, and then each of our competitors will get as long as 1 minute. You can go shorter if you want to, and give us your take on that particular question. Then you each have a 30-second rebuttal, and then a 10 to 15-second closing argument. And then the pressure once again falls to me to make a decision between my two friends as to who I think earned the point in that round. Should we be tied at the end of 4 rounds, don't worry, we do have a tiebreaker. The show never ends in a tie. I don't want anybody to be mad at each other at the end, but I also want there to be a clear winner. Then we're going to get some streaming recommendations from each one of you. And before we get started, fair warning, we are going to be talking a lot about Squid Game and the spoilers therein. So if you've not yet seen the show and you want to check it out and you want to come fresh, I would probably watch the show first. But if you don't care or you have seen the show, enjoy. If we're all ready to go, let's get that graphic for round number 1. We're jumping right into it. What is the most intense game in all of the Squid Game lore? Starting with you, Jon Lee Brody, a minute on the clock. What is the most intense game according to you?
Sure, I'm gonna have to go with game number 2, which was called Honeycomb. But if you looked on the doctor's little piece of paper he had in his little egg, it said "surtang pokki," which means pulling sugar. So in Korean school, which I went to as a kid, they would basically do that to kind of, get us to shut up and like do something else. But considering that they all got to go and then they voluntarily came back and they know that they could get killed, and now you got people with umbrella shapes, you got Sung-woo, the cheating ass that he is, knew what the game was, so he went for the triangle. So for me, like, watching that was very intense because one, people are going to get killed, but also when you put yourself in that position of, oh, I got this little needle and I got to carve out this impossible shape, this is impossible, and I got somebody standing over me in a pink suit with like a PlayStation basically symbol on his face that's ready to shoot me if I break the shape or if I run out of time and don't do it successfully. So for me, considering that they were on the outside world and voluntarily came back, that mindset plus having to be so precise and not able to have any room for error, Honeycomb for me was the most intense, and also took me back to the Saturday Korean schools when we were all competing. Slightly friendlier, I guess. Again, if you fail in Korean school, it's not as intense as Squid Game, but it kind of took me back to there. So for me personally, I go with Honeycomb.
That's good to know. And I think I'd probably feel the same as Gi-hun and have the same look on my face when he realized that he had the umbrella he had to carve out. It's like, oh, why couldn't I just have the PlayStation symbol? Let's go to you, Angie, for your minute as far as the most intense game.
Okay, so I'm not saying this is my favorite game in the show. I don't think it's necessarily the funnest or the cleverest, but you asked for most intense, so I am gonna have to go with the glass bridge. That's the one that provoked the most visceral reaction out of me. It had me like on the edge of my seat, holding my breath. My palms are sweating just thinking about it, just because the fact that literally any wrong step you make ends with you dying spectacularly. I think it's in some ways one of the most sadistic games because it defies strategy, at least as we've seen the players play it on the show. I mean, it has the highest body count. It guarantees that almost everyone dies, and your fate is sealed basically the moment that you choose which order you're going to go in. And so the suspense doesn't come so much from like who's going to win or who's going to lose, because obviously the odds are very much stacked in favor of the people in the back. But in just like watching these people have to force themselves to move, even as every fiber of their being is just like, no, we can't do this. So that is my answer.
Yeah, it did remind me a little of Indiana Jones trying to spell Jehovah at the end of Jones in the Last Crusade. So we have the glass game and we have the honeycomb game. John, why is your game more intense than what Angie brought up?
Well, because you can argue both sides, but with the glass game, Angie's completely correct in saying like everyone's like the guaranteed people dying is pretty much guaranteed. But also, if you're in Gi-hun's position, you can see where people went wrong. So you do have somewhat of a one up there, where with Honeycomb, you're just on your own. And in his case, just having this umbrella, there's no one he can turn to. I mean, he kind of stumbled upon this strategy of kind of licking the sugar down, which then Ilnan, the old man, kind of took on. But for me, you're so isolated with, you don't really benefit from watching others' mistakes in Honeycomb as you would in the glass breaking. But either one, you're really not in a great position playing that game.
Yeah. And neither one, you're guaranteed of a positive outcome. So, yeah. Angie, I'll put that same question to you. Why would the glass game be more intense? There obviously, one is a lot more physically involved than the other, at least you would think, or maybe one is just more physically specific than the other. But the glass over honeycomb, why is that the choice for you?
I think because with the honeycomb and with a lot of the other games, you at least start out thinking there's a chance I might win this. Obviously, if you have the umbrella, you're probably more screwed. But you start out being like, okay, there's still hope for me. Like I can get this done. The glass bridge is one where as soon as it starts, you're just like, especially if you're in the front, you're just like, oh, well, that's it. I'm gonna die here. This is how I go. So that is why I think the glass bridge, at least for me, was more intense than the honeycomb. Even though, as you point out, that's just a different kind of intensity.
The glass bridge or honeycomb. Jon Lee Brody, you're up first with your final statement defending honeycomb.
Well, look, honeycomb. I mean, I'm just telling you, you open up this little thing, and I think that element of surprise of, oh my God, this is what the game is. And also you going and saying, oh, I'll take the umbrella. And as a kid, when I played this game, I went after the umbrella once because it's like, oh, I like umbrellas. You go after shapes, and then you just find out you're totally screwed. So I think that versus kind of knowing the danger ahead versus like kind of that being the element of surprise and the clock starts, that for me is why it was more intense. And also coupling that with the fact that they were on the outside world like 24 hours before this and now voluntarily came back and now are probably going to die again because they got to carve out these impossible shapes. So that's where I go.
Just looks so easy, just the setup. It's like, oh, I can do this, but can you really under pressure with 10 minutes or less to pull it off? All right, Angie, final statement time for you.
I'm going to make a final statement the same way that the game itself does, which is that it ends with a screw you to the players when the thing explodes. And, in the case of one of those players, that ended up taking her out. So there we go.
Yeah, there's some lasting damage, even from the people who survived that game. I believe competitors survived that game total. So that does lend to the intensity. And now I have to make a ruling on this. And again, I told y'all pre-show that I thought I would be great at the red light, yellow, or red light, green light game. Then the honeycomb thing happens, and I'm like, I was never a big arts and crafts kid. Even though I feel like I'd be okay at the glass game, I have no idea because, again, it just matters where you are positioned, and then if there's a little bit of strategy. But as intense, because honeycomb is so intense just because, again, you see 10 minutes on the clock, and it's something that I don't have any context for. But if you grew up and you at least had some frame of reference, maybe you have some confidence. And the other thing about the honeycomb is that I feel like the game makers probably learned from their, not mistakes, but from their leniency there, because you do have a character who smuggles a lighter in and is able to light it not being seen because she's hiding under a slide. It feels like that was corrected by the game makers later on in the glass game, simply because there is somebody who is a professional glass worker who could tell the difference between what the false security block was and what an actual block you could stand on is. So they turned the lights out. And so while the initial games were on the same playing field right away, I feel like as it went on, they both got a lot more intense, but I think the glass game got a little more intense towards the end. And like you said, even the survivors of that game had to deal with some shrapnel. And so it's a tough call already here, but I am leaning towards Angie's call.
Just give her the point, man. After hearing that, I'm like, you know what? I can admit when I've been beaten.
Hey, well, that just made me feel a lot easier. So yeah, even the loser round one agrees with me that Angie gets the point, and she goes up 1-0. Angie Han 1, Jon Lee Brody nothing. But now we go to round number 2, and that is going to be the most shocking death. And so, Angie, you now have the honor, and you may kick off round number 2. What is your most shocking death on Squid Game?
I have to go with Ellie. I don't think it's necessarily shocking in the sense that you're surprised that he dies. I mean, it's pretty clear from the beginning of the show that most of these people are going to die, and he's probably going to be one of them. But it just comes as such a gut punch. And I think that you've seen a lot of people die by this point, but it's the first death, at least for me, where you already know this is not the kind of show where, like, if something horrible is about to happen, someone's going to swoop in and rescue that person. But his death was the first time where I just hoped, even though I knew it wasn't going to happen, I just found myself being like, oh my God, like, please, someone, some twist, like something happen to save this character that I've come to like so much. And then, of course, the way that he dies is just so tragic. He's betrayed by the person that he trusts the most in the game. It's also just such a moment for Sang-woo because it's a point of no return for him. So I think all those things combined, I'm not saying that I thought he was going to survive the whole thing and win the whole thing, but wow, that just came as such a, like, I gasped when that happened.
It's a good point because there's so much mayhem going on right at the outset of these games in this show that you expect most characters to meet their demise some way. So it's not necessarily that you're shocked by that outcome, but it's the anticipation leading up and the hope that there could be a twist, that they could survive another couple minutes, and then it happens. And it is, as Angie said, a gut punch there, John. So what was the biggest gut punch for you? Or do you have an additional twist for us in this round?
You know, that's the thing. I kind of approach this question a little differently because, like as you said at the top of the show, I've watched a lot of Korean movies and TV shows, from K-dramas that my mom watched, you know, on VHS tapes, to, you know, the Vengeance trilogy and Bong Joon-ho's whole filmography. So I'm very kind of accustomed to kind of the slow character development, the slow burn of getting to know these characters, and also knowing the patterns of Korean cinema. So I go in knowing that these characters are all probably going to die. You know, no one's safe, as opposed to American cinema, where they love invincible protagonists, you know, that always live on to the end. Like The Rock will never lose a fight because it's literally in his contract that he can't lose a fight on screen. You know, that's a fun fact. Everyone can look it up. It should be on IMDb trivia, whatever, but I'm telling you, it's all true. And I hope The Rock doesn't come after me, but it's all true. No lies were told. But anyways, I went a different way. I was more shocked that Gi-yeon lived, because it, to me, as a storyteller watching that, it seemed like he was being set up for this epic failure as, one, a failed husband, a failed father, you know, who had his tail between his legs trying to borrow money and all to get himself out of debt. And he's got his, you know, mom stuff going on. I thought he was just being set up to be killed, because I'm so used to protagonists in Asian cinema just being killed off. If you look at Infernal Affairs, they killed off Tony Leung, you know, and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's the way I went. I was surprised that Gi-yeon lived. I thought Sung-woo was going to walk away the winner, because he seemed like so diabolical and such a cheating ass, you know, MFer, that that was what was shocking to me. The deaths didn't really, I guess the manner in which the deaths came was a little shocking, but to me, it was more surprising that Gi-yeon lived.
Yeah, I mean, and it could be the manner in which Gi-yeon did live, because you do feel like the show is setting up for some sort of emotional downfall, or maybe a noble self-sacrifice at the end on behalf of somebody else who he's come to admire. Angie, this is going to be a tough call already. So why is the death of Ali more shocking than Gi-yeon surviving?
I think a lot of it has to do with Sung-woo as well, because he's a character that, like, you can already tell, you know, by that point that he's not necessarily like the most heroic or good person, but still, for it to just come to the fore in that way, just like that is part of the shock of it, is that, like, you know that he actually does have like some sort of affection and respect for this person, and then he just betrays him in the coldest way possible. And Ali's face when he like figures out what happened, Sung-woo's face when he's like leaving and he understands exactly what he did, like, I think to me that just, wow.
It is a wow moment for sure. All right, John. So let's talk about the survival of Gi-yeon in the context of all these other characters perishing, including Ali. Why is that more shocking than any one death, such as with Ali?
You know, with Gi-yeon, he almost goes in, if to use a wrestling term, it's almost like he was the jobber. I thought for sure he was going to be set up to get killed by episode 3. I didn't think he was going to make it past episode 3. So every time he kept surviving, I was like, my God, this guy just like won't go away. And in terms of, you know, Ali's death happening the same time as Gi-yeon was playing Il-nam, you know, and kind of conning him and saying, oh, you like, what did you say? What number did you say? You know, that was like, oh my God, like he's taking advantage of this man's dementia, which we find out later was kind of all pre-calculated by Il-nam. But, you know, that was what just, I was like, the fact that he was able to weasel his way out of these situations, as he did in life outside of the Squid Game, I guess it's not that shocking, but still shocking that he got away with it and walked away essentially the winner of the Squid Game.
So let's get to the winner of this particular round. A final statement still to come from each of our competitors. Angie, you have the floor. Ali's death, it affected us emotionally.
Yes, and don't let his death be in vain.
All right. All right. Justice for Ali. John, up to you. The final statement.
Oh, I mean, I got nothing. No, I'm just kidding. You know, you know, I'm just basically going to kind of reiterate what I've already been saying in terms of just the way it was set up. And I guess thinking outside of the story itself, if I think of the story in a vacuum, even then it's surprising that anybody survives. But to me, it's like Gi-yeon had no business being good at any of these games but then somehow, like I said, he finds a way. So to me, that was just shocking, more than any of the deaths, because the deaths are just stuff that I was just kind of expecting. It was just a matter of how, but I was 100% sure at the time that Gi-yeon was going to die. So
and right from the time that we meet him in episode 1, we're pulling for this sort of, whether you want to say underdog or lovable loser or whatever sort of archetype that is, we want him to succeed, but then our heart also breaks when we see him just throwing money away at the track, and we're like, I just want you to get it together, and just, you're so close, you don't realize it. But then you start seeing just how brutal these games are, and how the the value of life means nothing to the game makers. And so, as far as Ali goes, I was surprised when that actually happened, although I suspected the whole time. And that's kind of why I'm leaning towards the survival of Gi-yeon, because I thought that there was going to be some sort of thing that was going to break my heart in reference to that specific character. With Ali, as soon as we saw the way that he left his employer, even though he had every right to do, in my mind, what he did, and I'm not going to hold that against him, I still feel like a transgression like that we see play out means you could be a noble person and you're doing your best to provide for your family, but I sense the end is near for you. I also felt that way about Gi-yeon, and so the fact that Gi-yeon survived, ironically, is my most shocking non-death. So Jon Lee Brody gets the point.
I'm on the board.
Tied at 1 after 2 rounds, and it's just another one of these binge battles where, God, I just love talking about this show. And it really doesn't matter, because I feel like I can go back and revisit this time and time again. Hopefully we get more sooner rather than later, because that's just how I am. I just want you to keep feeding me this stuff. But I really feel like I could go back and rewatch this season over and over and over again. And that's sort of the question of round 3. And we're going to start with you in this round, John. The topic: does it live up to the hype? Because, again, it's like what Angie and I were talking about right before we started the game. You know, you hear people talking about it and you see it pop up on social media, and then it just becomes this phenomenon. Does it live up to that billing in your eyes?
I'm going to say no, because it doesn't live up to the hype. It surpasses it, in my opinion, because of the fact that it'll hit you differently emotionally depending on what you've been going through in your life. You know, like if you had lost a loved one, if you had it, that's the beauty of Korean cinema, because in American cinema, it's more about moving the plot along. Let's develop the plot. Where in Korea, it's more about let's develop these characters. And if the plot comes with it, in line with them, great. But let's put the characters first. So when it comes to that, when you get to know these characters, you're going to interpret them differently. You're, like, people, I think, generally will view Gi-yeon as just kind of, what that's going on with you, man. But but if you had someone, maybe you did have an absentee father, it's going to hit you differently. So I feel like because of the character development and how deep that goes, that's the beauty of it in terms of audiences, because they're all going to absorb it pretty much the same way, but also emotionally it'll hit you differently. And just from a filmmaking perspective, it was just beautifully shot. And then you care for these characters. By the time you get to episode 6, you care about each and one of those heartbreaking deaths, because they took the time to develop characters for the first 5 episodes, where usually they're trying to wrap that up in the first 2 episodes in American TV and cinema. So for me, it definitely surpasses it. And that's my first my minute.
And it's an interesting point you bring up, because we expect the intensity of the game to be the overwhelming factor, not necessarily the emotional attachment we're going to develop with all these characters. So, Angie, it surpassed the hype for Jon Lee Brody. How about you? Did it at least live up to the billing?
I think it lived up to the hype. It is, I do think it loses its way a little bit toward the end. I'm one of the people that's a little bit mixed on it. It tries to do too much. And I think the old man twist, as surprising as it is I'm still not sure how I feel about it. I don't think that having him explain it from bed is necessarily the most satisfying way to wrap up some loose ends. But the thing is, for the vast majority of the show, everything just clicks. It's like John said, the characters are great. The visuals are so striking. I mean, this is a show that doesn't look like anything else really, and that you recognize immediately. The pacing is also incredible. I mean, remember the cliffhanger and the tug of war one, where like surprise, you're just gonna have to watch 2 episodes in a row, because what are you gonna do, not see how that ends? It's so queasy and dark, but it's also impossible to look away from. And then of course at the core of all this is this pretty cogent critique about inequality and the way that capitalism robs these people of their dignity, their morality, their humanity, and ultimately for most of them, their lives. It's not subtle, but I think it's the storytelling equivalent of like a blunt force trauma, and sometimes you just want to be slapped in the face.
I would have loved if Netflix ended that one episode of Tug of War and they just put up a giant card that said, "What are you going to do? Not watch?" Just that's kind of how this show makes us feel. So, okay, John, your rebuttal. So, you both like the show, and you both bought into the hype, and you were both rewarded for buying into it. So, let's get into the specifics because you touched on the emotional weight of the show. Why is that the most important asset to it in beating the hype that you had for this show?
Well, because if you don't care about these characters, if you don't get to know them, not necessarily care, but like you know, in episode 2, you get to know like where these people come from. So you figure out in your own mind, I don't like this person, I like this person, I want this person. Like Ali, I wanted to survive. Like that, if anyone would win the Squid Game, I wanted Ali to win, but you just kind of knew it wasn't going to happen. But like I said, that's the beauty of how these characters are written. And like it can hit you differently emotionally depending on what's going on with you, you know. And like I just think that's a beautiful thing when you build these characters up, and also those games don't mean anything really if you don't have some sort of emotional investment in these characters. And the fact that they take the time to do that in the show, that's why I say it surpasses it. If it was just face value and you're doing these crazy games and people are getting killed, you know, visually that's striking, visually it's shocking, but that emotional weight that it came with, it's because of the character development. And that's why I say it surpasses the hype.
Yeah, there's so much baggage that each character has, and then when we bring our own baggage to the show, it becomes an overwhelming sort of experience in the best way possible. But Angie, you also touched on some very important points when you're talking about all of the themes that are interwoven into this show, and that's why it was rewarding for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a weird round because I agree with what most of John says, and clearly we both really like the show. But for me, a large part of the appeal was also that, like, it's like, yes, you care about these characters, yes, you care about the intensity and the drama and all that, but it's also just tied up with the fact of like, why are these people here? And it has so much to do with you know, real world issues that I think a lot of us, too many of us, can relate to on some level. And it's not just that's like a convenient excuse to get the characters in there. Like as the show goes on, the way that it plays out, you see that's continuing to be something that the show is dealing with.
Yeah, within this round, it feels like this is a little Squid Game where you all have formed an alliance and you're just like, all right, we're going to be each other's teammate and we're going to play off each other's themes. So I will throw it back to you, John, for your final statement as far as why this show surpassed the hype it had built up for you.
You know, I think because for a lot of, you know, I always hear in Hollywood, this came out of nowhere, which I guess in a sense it did because it just came on our radar. But for years, Korean cinema and TV has had incredible content. And I think, you know, as we gotten used to kind of Western filmmaking and the way the pacing of those films and TV shows are, that the fact that Squid Game blew the doors wide open and now people realize, oh, there's a different way to tell these stories. It doesn't have to be this very strict 3-act structure or whatever. This is another way to tell stories. And I hope it opens the doors to other foreign kind of entities coming in that we can absorb, because we tend to think there's only one way to tell a story. There's only one way to write a story. And I feel like Squid Game is really opening the eyes of, you know, creatives, audiences, executives, whoever, that you can tell it this way. It doesn't have to be this 3-act structure that every studio wants. So on that side, I feel like that's why it surpasses, because I do think it's going to be a trailblazer and hopefully open a lot more doors for creators of color. And, you know, as a Korean American, you know, I hope there's more Korean content coming out for us too. So that's for me, it's like, it's a very personal thing. And that's why I just kind of think that's why I always say it surpasses it.
You would certainly hope so. But sometimes when we have that deep of an attachment to something or a property, we can also be disappointed by it. So it's nice to hear you say that you were not only amazed by, but actually surpassed what your expectations were. Angie, I'll give you a little more time if you wanted to for your final statement here as to why it lived up to the hype.
I think for me, a show, like, I know a show is good if I'm still thinking about it afterwards, if it's something that I want to tell people about, if it's something that I want to talk about, if it's something that where, like, you know, even after I know everything's going to happen, like, it's still something that's sticking with me. And this is a show that I think really does. In fact, I actually ended up rewatching a good amount of it again, because my husband started watching it after I had already finished it. And like, I was actually really impressed by how much it holds up, even when you know all the twists that are coming, even when you know exactly what's going to happen, even when you know all the mysteries that are going to be unraveled. So yeah, lives up to the hype.
It does live up to the hype. And, you know, I have strict rules for this show that Christian Rubalcaba, our beloved engineer, and I work hard on. And this is the second round in a row that John has sort of fudged those rules a little bit because it was shocking death. You took somebody who lived and I gave you the point, and I find myself doing it again because does it live up to the hype? It surpasses it. And this is me being biased, just going off my personal experience. I've had shows hyped up for me, and a lot of times it's lived up to the hype. Sometimes I said, oh yeah, it was good, but the twist. And I think for me, what gives John the point in this round is that it's the only controversy I had heard about this show at all, because I came to it a week later than everybody else, was that the ending might leave you mixed. And the fact that I like the ending a lot. I like what they did in unraveling and then tying a lot of these loose ends together. That for me did enough to not only say this is a great show that deserves people talking about it, but it blew my mind in more than one way. And the filmmaking aspects that John pointed out too, I think that is which way I'm going to lean in this round, because I'm on the Squid Game train right now. So that's going to be a point for Jon Lee Brody, even though as Angie fairly said, y'all did kind of just, have the same points. Because
we can both get a half point. Is that allowed? No.
I can give you.
This is why John is going to win the Squid Game. He's so clever, kind of like bending the rules a little bit.
Yeah.
You would survive a lot longer than I would, I think.
I would have pressed that red button. I'd have been the F out of there. I wouldn't be playing at all.
That is a great kind of halftime question. Okay. Are we all hitting the button because none of us are in crippling debt currently? Are we all hitting the red button? Is anybody hitting the green button just because they want to see if they can compete and win all that money?
I'm not hitting the green button.
No, I'm out of there. No.
Yeah, I'm done. I'll get payday loans or whatever.
I do think it's a credit to the show that it seems like an insane decision, but then the show makes really just sells why these people would actually want to play the game.
Yeah, and now I can just stand up and say I would have hit the green button because I would have been outvoted anyway. So we all get to go back to our lives, and I get to say I wanted to play. Let's keep playing this game, Binge Battle, and let's move on to topic 4, which is the best episode of Squid Game. You have to narrow all of this emotionally weighty and living up to the hype content to one episode out to you. Jon Lee Brody, you currently enjoy a 2-1 lead. This could give you the win in Binge Battle for this round. You get to kick off.
All right. So in terms of favorite episode, the series in its entirety is bad, crazy. But I go with episode 2, joo-ryoung, which is Korean for hell, because you're at a point where this first red light, green light game happened. Now they see that people are getting killed. Now it's kind of the aftermath. But then they hold that vote, and you start to see who's really motivated by what. And the fact that you saw Sung-woo press yes, and you see Ji-yoon's kind of surprised because, then you're like, wait, what's going on? He voted yes, and I can't believe he did that. Then you're seeing them escape this one hell and going back to the real world, and you start to see where Ji-young comes from. He's like absentee father. His mom's got diabetes, needs this kind of surgery really badly. Sung-woo is in massive debt. And he's trying to hide it from his mom because his mom is so proud of him. Duk-soo is the tough guy, but he's not so tough on the outside. Junho, the detective, is kind of figuring stuff out because his brother's in there. I think this really laid the groundwork in terms of getting to know these characters and why we're going to care what happens in episodes 3 and beyond. So I always had to give it to episode 2 because it took that time to really develop these characters and why the outside world, despite the fact that they could die in this Squid Game, the outside world is that much worse because they're in debt. People are coming after them and they're just feel like nobody. They want to feel a sense of belonging. And it's, it's a weird psychological thing, but that's the one that got me in terms of that's my favorite episode personally.
And just that heartbreaking scene where you got to choose between the new guy in your ex's life offering you all this money, and all you got to do is just never see the family again. It just rips your heart out right there. So, Angie, John's taking episode 2. Which episode for you was the best?
I am going to go with episode 6, Ganbu, and I feel like it's actually weirdly kind of two sides of the same coin, because John talked about all the setup that it does in terms of making you really care about these characters and understand who they are. I think that the episode that I picked is the one where a lot of that pays off. It is, I think, the most gripping episode of the entire season. It is the most devastating episode in a whole series that is all devastating episodes. I mean, the twist of them playing against each other and not with each other comes as a surprise, and I think I just immediately teared up as soon as they revealed that. And that episode has just such incredible character work. Each character's play reveals who they are, not just to us, but also to them. And in some cases surprises them. Like I think Kyun in particular is one where like he seems like such a good guy, but then you see like, and I'm not saying he's not, but you see like when push really comes to shove, like I think there's a little bit of surprise in how he decides to react to that. And it's also the one where the stakes that I was talking about earlier of how this show has so much to do with capitalism and how it, like chews people up and spits them out. It's the one where the stakes of that become really personal. Like the social commentary stops being abstract or not just kind of screwing over someone distantly, but in a very real, direct, traumatic way.
Yeah, the visceral interactions just become elevated by that episode where it really does become a boots on the ground feel as opposed to just this learning about these concepts in a history book. Let's go back to you, John, for your rebuttal as to why that earlier episode in Squid Game was the best in your eyes.
It's ironic because I was in between 2 and 6 in terms of like what my favorite ones would be. You know what I mean? So it's like I feel like Angie and I really agree on everything, but because episode 6 was really kind of almost our Reigns of Castamere, if you will. Like Red Wedding, Game of Thrones sort of thing. But I always got like as a storyteller myself, I always am going to favor that character development because you have to lay that groundwork in order for there to be a payoff. I don't think you can have the one without the other. So that's where I'm always going to favor kind of that side of it in terms of picking the two. If you put a gun to my head and I had to pick one, I'm just like, I'm going to go with episode 2 because it's debatable. Episode 6 doesn't have the emotional weight, doesn't even exist really if you don't lay that groundwork.
All right, Angie, but you said you were also between 2 and 6. So why did 6 win out for you over episode 2?
Well, I think that I think that, like I said, John is right. That episode lays so much groundwork. You're right that there is no episode 6 hitting as hard as it does without episode 2. But I also feel like episode 6 is the one that represents the show better than episode 2. Episode 2 is as great as it is kind of an anomaly. It takes place in the outside world. You get a lot that's the one where you get a lot of backstory. But I think episode 6 is just a show firing on all cylinders. There's a game involved, so that itself makes it, I think, in some ways more representative. And you just see like the intensity cranked up to 10. So I think that to me is the best episode of the entire season.
That's right. The competitors told to pair up, and there's going to be some marbles involved. So let's go back to you for your final statement here. Episode 2, why did it mean so much to you, Jon Lee Brody?
So if the episodes were kind of like the NBA timeline, I would say episode 6 is Michael Jordan because you pick one out of that in a vacuum, that's the one. I can't take away from that. But episode 2, this is the Magic and Bird and the Oscar Robertsons who really laid the groundwork. As you know, Magic and Bird, the reason why the NBA became globalized and gave it a stage for which Michael Jordan could prosper. So that's why I would always give that respect to episode 2 because that's the Magic and Bird. Without Magic and Bird, it's debatable there's not a Michael Jordan, at least not in the epic scale that we got to know him. So that's my final argument.
Now, as great as Wilt was and as great as George Mikan was, it was a different game when Magic and Bird entered the NBA.
Absolutely.
Let's keep it in the world of Squid Game, and let's go back to you, Angie, for your final statement. 6 over 2. The Michael Jordan, if you will, over the Magic and Bird.
That was a dirty trick because before the show, I mentioned that I do not understand basketball. So for you to bring that up, I mean, that is playing dirty.
Now we know who's the Song-woo of this game.
Very fair point.
But my actual rebuttal is that, yes, episode 2 does great payoff. And I really do think that John and I agree. They're two sides of the same coin. There are two pieces that fit really well together. But as important as the setup is, you also need to have that payoff. You need to, you've got us primed for all this great stuff. And then you want to see okay, but how is it actually going to pay off? What is actually going to happen? What is the point at which it stops just being oh, this is interesting and just devastates you? And that to me is episode 6.
Angie, I think that basketball is actually going to help you in this round. And here's why I bring it up is because as John intimated, if episode 2 is Magic and Bird entering the NBA and then episode 6 is Michael Jordan in his prime, here's why I see that. It's because it's the actual game that we're focused on. And from the game comes all of these plot lines and these character interactions in episode 6. Whereas episode 2, it's great to get that backstory and it's necessary, but we only care about seeing that backstory because we just saw how intense that first game of red light, green light is. And so the show sort of works as an inverse where, sure, the show opens and we care about these people, but it feels like a drama that we're watching. Once we get to the game and we see how life or death this actually is, then we care even more about getting to know these little hints as to what the backstory was and how these characters might have come across each other and how they're going to interact in the future. And so I did find myself, as great as episode 2 is and as necessary as episode 2 is, I did find myself saying after episode 6, that was the one. First of all, I needed to take a breath after episode 6. I needed to actually just go walk the dog around the block and just, gather my thoughts. But I think that the intensity of the marble game, seeing how evolved these characters have been with their interactions with each other since episode 2, that is what is just tipping the scales a little bit in favor of Angie's argument. And so Angie Han gets the point in round 4. And now all of a sudden, we are tied, and this is why I love doing this show, is because we do have a definitive winner in a tiebreaker. This is overtime, and so here's how it works. It's a little different, just that it goes by a little bit faster. In round 5, each competitor gets an argument, and that's it. So you get a minute to tell me in this round who your favorite character in Squid Game is. And because you won the last point, Angie, I'm going to give you the choice. Do you want to go first, or do you want to defer to Jon Lee Brody and then you can go second?
I'll go first.
All right. Your favorite character in Squid Game for the tiebreaker.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Han Min-yo, and not just because we have the same last name. She is not a good person, but she is my favorite character. She brings such chaotic energy, and I love that her strategy just amounts to be the most annoying human imaginable. And you know what? It actually works pretty well. She even gets to sit out that horrible marbles game just because she's so irritating that nobody wants to play with her. There's actually a method to her madness. She'll say or do anything she needs to in order to save her skin, which in some ways makes her one of the most self-aware characters. I think she's one of the few characters who seems to know exactly who she is, even if she maybe overestimates her own powers a little bit. She's initially someone that you look at with the, kind of like, oh, like, who is this? I think she's a figure of hatred or scorn or even pity, but she turns out to be pretty terrifying and formidable in her own right. And she makes good on her promise to Toksu when she says, if you betray me, I will kill you. She absolutely does. She does it in such a spectacularly spiteful way. She is like a cockroach, and I mean that as a compliment. She just sticks around way longer than you think that anyone should be able to.
Player 212. All right. So Jon Lee Brody, now your argument for the best character in all of Squid Game.
I think we've established at this point that I tend to think on a different, playing field. So I'm going to go a different way. I'm not going to pick any of the leads. My favorite character is Sung-woo's mom, because in all this world of all this kind of negativity, backstabbing, and all this stuff, no matter what, she just has this pure energy about her. And even when these federal agents are coming looking for Sung-woo, her son, when she's been bragging about, oh, he's top of his class at Seoul University, which is a big deal. As someone who has an Asian mom himself, I know what a big deal it is to excel academically. And the fact that Gi-yeon would come to her later with Sunbook's younger brother saying, can you look after this boy? Without hesitation, she says, okay. And then at that point, when she gets half of the prize money, you are so happy for her. Like, I didn't think Gi-yeon deserved the prize money, but Sung-woo's mom, yes, her having that money and her just having that kind heart to take care of this boy, I think it's a nice reminder that despite all the negativity in the world, there's going to be that one beacon of light. And for me, seeing Sung-woo's mom just having this pure heart, and like I said, even when the federal agents are there, she's like, what? Like, no, it can't be. Like, she still wouldn't paint him in a negative light. So that's why I say Sung-woo's mom is my favorite character.
Why are y'all doing this to me? I really thought we were about to team up for the last couple rounds. And now Angie takes the character who is the most mercurial, the most who can just do whatever it takes to get ahead. And then Jon Lee Brody comes in with just the one pure center of the show. And now I'm just torn between these two worlds. And so to make a ruling, like, look, the reason why Squid Game worked for me is because we had all of these crazy, almost Loki-like characters where you don't know how far you can trust them, how much rope to give them. And that's not just a reference to the tug of war game, where it's like, who can I trust? Who is going to be the center here? And that's the fun of the show, is that it pinballs your emotions back and forth for really all 9 episodes. But the argument that you make there, John, really entices me, because we do need somebody who is pure in this, and to see how far somebody will go to remain pure, but then also to see the disappointment when the federal agents come to her and say, do you know what your son has done? And you just see the crestfallen nature of that. That shows us just the amount of desperation of everybody who is in Squid Game. Everybody all 456 competitors are just like this guy and have let down their families in some way. And bearing the weight of all of that competition and all of those competitors is that one mother figure who you just want something good. If nothing good is going to happen to anybody in this show, and most of them don't meet a kind fate, that's the person that you want to see get something out of this at the end. And so you did win me over with your appeal to my heart, and I am going to give the overtime point to Jon Lee Brody, and he wins the match today with Squid Game. And I find myself doing this every time on the show. Angie, I'm sorry. It was a great argument. There was this. I feel like this is why I could never be a Squid Game game maker, because I just care about people too much. You each split the prize money that's in that glass bubble that should be emerging from your respective homes at any minute now. We rigged it up for that.
Because I love Angie's argument too, and I love that character as well. Because you're like, man, she's like a little cheating, but she's resourceful, man. She's gonna, and she is a woman of her word.
I love her so much. She's a horrible person, but I adore her.
Oh, and if I
love
echo her favorite scene, like that, the bathroom scene might be one of my favorites in the entire show. It was just so well done, and it was one of those moments where you're genuinely like in suspense, but you also can't help but laugh at the craziness that's happening on screen. So really, really well done game by both of y'all here today in this episode of Binge Battle. Jon Lee Brody, you're our winner.
Well, first one out, so 1-0. You know, starting out like I'm on a quest to have an undefeated season, even though maybe this is a one and done, so I can retire on top.
Just as a quick postscript, because you are wearing a Lakers shirt, so LeBron James had some comments where he wasn't maybe thrilled with the end of Squid Game, and then I love the way the creator of Squid Game came back at him and it was like, hey, have you seen Space Jam 2? I mean, come on, give me something here. Just a quick sort of final statement, starting with you, Angie, and then to you, John. The ending of the show, was it satisfying for you? Is there a different way that you thought that they were going to take it, or that you would have liked to have seen them take that?
The ending of Squid Game, I'm a little bit mixed on it. I think I mentioned earlier, I just felt like that episode was trying to do too much. And while I appreciate that it's setting up a season 2, and like, you know, I'm not going to be mad about more of a show that I like, part of me kind of wished that they had wrapped it up in a more final way, and maybe not done the whole setup where like, oh, he's gonna go back and all that. Like, I don't know how I feel about that yet. And I think the old man twist, as surprising as it was, because that one I just really did not see coming, it ends up being like him kind of just laying in bed explaining stuff. And it's interesting, but I think in that moment I was a little bit like, I think I maybe would have liked to seen that shown and not just told. But I feel like I'm sounding a lot more negative on the show as a whole than I am. Like, I really love the show. The ending is just one where I'm like, that was good. It's not my favorite episode.
Yeah, we both established that the show at least lived up to the hype. And John, you said it surpassed the hype for you. Does that include the ending, or were you just a little more lukewarm on that than the rest of the show?
You know, I was satisfied with it in the sense that, you know, in American cinema, we want that happy ending so badly. So in American cinema, he would have gotten on that plane and forgotten about it so he could be a good father. But that's not who Gi-eun is. You know, even though there's that meme out there, this guy wants to do everything but be a good father, basically. And so for that to happen, for me as a storyteller, I gave such kudos to that, because that was so true to who he is. Because in reality, he's not getting on that plane. If he sees an opportunity to go back, he's going back. So for me, like, I think in a storytelling perspective, I was very satisfied with it. But again, LeBron is probably just used to American storytelling. You know, if you watch more Korean movies, maybe he'd be like, oh, I get it. You know, it's just a different way to tell the story. But also, art is subjective, man. You know, not everybody has to agree, not everybody has to like it, and if he didn't like the ending, then that's his opinion to say so. And you know, and that's the beauty of cinema. You know, at the end of the day.
Do we think the creator of Squid Game has seen Space Jam 2: A New Legacy?
I think he's seen the beginning. I don't think he's made it all the way through.
I don't know that many people made it all the way through Space Jam 2, including myself. But I do love.
I had to for work.
Yeah, right. It's a job at that point. I do love the idea of LeBron James and Anthony Davis just huddled in a hotel room on the road and like just going crazy watching Squid Game. That just scene alone brings me immense joy. We do have to wrap things up here, but it was so great having you both on the show. This was such a spirited debate, and I feel like we all are going to leave better friends for it. Angie Han, starting with you, where can everybody find the stuff you're working on? And if you have a social media handle, or you have any streaming recommendations for the kids out there, let it fly.
I answers to all those questions. You can find my work on the Hollywood Reporter. So I think that's just hollywoodreporter.com. You can find me on social media at AJHAN on Twitter. And for my streaming recommendation, I'm going to, ironically, this is a basketball themed one. I'm going to go with Swagger. It is a show that is based on, sort of inspired by, I guess not based on, the childhood experiences of NBA player Kevin Durant, and so it just follows the adolescent kid in the elite, in the high stakes world of elite youth of basketball, and it is just, as you know, I know nothing about basketball, but it's one that just hooked me from the beginning. Like, the acting is really good, the story is so compelling. It's just such a smart, well executed show. I can't wait for everyone else to see it because it premieres on Sunday.
Oh, I'm definitely checking out Swagger. Kevin Durant, I'm from the same neck of the woods, although he probably was a little bit better at high school basketball than I was.
I mean, who can say, right? Who knows?
Yeah, it was different eras. It was a different time back then.
Right.
Jon Lee Brody, you are a huge basketball enthusiast. Where can everybody find the stuff you're working on? And what is your streaming recommendation?
So youtube.com/Gegghead. That's the word egghead, but with a G in front of it. It's a channel that I co-founded with Freddie Prinze Jr. and Claire Grant. And Mark Ellis has been a repeat guest many times, playing different card games and board games, and hopefully we can get those going again soon. So youtube.com/Gegghead. I'm on at Jon Lee Brody across the board on all social media. I also have a podcast called Real Psychology. That's REEL, where myself and a licensed therapist discuss the mental health of fictional characters. And it's available right now on Fireside Chat, which is Mark Cuban and Fallon Fettime's new kind of storytelling app. It's basically Clubhouse on a lot of steroids. So check out Fireside Chat, which is available to the public now. I'd love to talk to you two about this as well, because I feel like this would be a great vehicle for the two of you to be on there. So Real Psychology, it's on Mondays at 2 p.m. on Fireside Chat, where we discuss different characters and their mental health. And as far as when I'm streaming, I mean, I like watching old shows. So I'm in the middle of a One Tree Hill rewatch and a Boy Meets World rewatch. For whatever reason, I was needing to kind of satisfy those nostalgia vibes, but also there's these, I love sports documentaries. So Angie talking about Swagger, I'm going to talk about, there's this series called Untold, and it's like a docuseries on Netflix that kind of talks about the Malice at the Palace with Ron Artest, who's now Meta World Peace, and Jermaine O'Neal, and all these kind of scandals in sports. And there's another one called Bad Sport, where they talk about point shaving and all this stuff. So it's, even if you're not a sports person, I think the stories of these human beings and what they went through will make you so emotionally invested in it. So I recommend those two docuseries if you're looking for kind of a change of pace from the scripted stuff.
And does everyone see what Squid Game does to you? That poor Jon Lee Brody, after watching Squid Game, now is doing a Boy Meets World rewatch just to feel some happiness and just to lower the stakes at the end of the day, because nothing like that goes on in Boy Meets World. As far as I know, I haven't seen the whole show.
The Halloween episode in like season 6 or 7 was kind of high stakes, but it was also a dream sequence of Sean Hunter. But it was a whole "I Know What You Did Last Summer" Scream kind of parody. That one was a little nuts. But yeah, you're right. For the most part, Mr. Feeney always saves the day, and we all could use a Mr. Feeney in our life, I think.
Yeah, it's been a while since I watched it, but I feel like most of the characters of that show are still alive at the end. So, you know, pretty different from Squid Game.
That might be one of the bigger differences between Squid Game and, again, Boy Meets World. So if we ever do an episode of Boy Meets World, y'all are welcome to come back and debate, but I'd love to have y'all both back sooner rather than later, because this was such a fun conversation. And again, it's just one of those things that we're still lucky enough to have. It's hopefully we're coming out of a pandemic, but you just have shows like Hit that just hit the right spot at the right time for all of us. Squid Game, I would count amongst those lofty ranks. So for Angie Han and Jon Lee Brody and our esteemed engineer, Christian Rubalcaba, and everybody here behind the scenes at Rotten Tomatoes, I am Mark Ellis. Thanks so much for tuning into Binge Battle. And reminder, Rotten Tomatoes has a bunch of great content, including things where you can check out similar shows that you might be turned on to. If you're a fan of Squid Game, check out other shows like Battle Royale, for example, and other things you can check out around the Rotten Tomatoes world. So for everybody here, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Binge Battle.